And so, and so, and so it started this whole dialogue that every time I would come home to the house that I was staying in, I would see her on the side of the road. And she actually, she had a disease, and the disease took her sight, and then they took her eyes at 5. And this, I asked, would it be okay if I use this photograph as a way to really illustrate this idea of sight beyond my sight, or this method? And I'll talk a little more about that in a second, but just to give you a heads up on who I am, I'm Gabriel Tait. Interestingly, in my career, my PhD is in intercultural studies with an emphasis in anthropology and leadership. And my mentor for my dissertation was Steve Ibarola, and the second reader was Dr. Michael Renkowitz, who worked with James Bradley. And the third reader was Dr. Rick Gray, who was my leadership professor. And what was interesting is, I buried almost the most unique part, is that I did my PhD at a seminary. And so many times when we are in these state universities and academies, it's like, oh, you're one of those people, right? And you're like, well, what does that mean, right? And so my degree is a PhD in intercultural studies, which is this marriage of anthropology, leadership, but looking at methods and tools to work cross-culturally. And so that is, my 50-cent version, but I have the pleasure of serving here at Ball State University as an associate professor in journalism, in the School of Journalism and Strategic Communication. And this, for the next 2 years, I will be serving as the Honors College Ball Brothers Foundation Faculty Fellow, which is a whole different world, as you all know, and engaging with students and doing great work. And so I'm grateful for those. My research area is really on identity and culture through the use of photography, particularly in how we are able to acquire narratives and better understandings of community and culture from people like us, right? And so I worked as a photojournalist for the Detroit Free Press, in which I was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, and then worked at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And my interests are obviously photography, changing multimedia techniques, traveling, and this whole idea of cross-cultural engagement. And I love American football. So for our talk today, we're going to look at the historical context of Sight Beyond My Sight, but I will take you on a brief journey to Liberia, in which my research is situated. It was tested there and then eventually approved as a method. And then practical applications. And so one of the joys that I've had in utilizing Sight Beyond My Sight, or you'll hear me use SBMS, is that we have the pleasure of, it's contextual. So you can shape it to the context in which you're serving. And so working with Jim, one of the things that we were able to do is use SBMS in a partnership for a year-long project with the Ross Community Center, in which we learned visual ethnographies, and the Center for Middletown Studies actually sponsored one of the letters that helped the project work. So thank you for that. So, and then we'll answer any questions that are there, okay? So if you don't mind, we're gonna go on a brief journey. I know our time is short, but I'd like to just kind of walk you through why this became kind of my interest and now desire to help bring attention to both peoples and cultures, but also a different methodology. And so for those who have not, I'll talk about, I have one handout that offers a comparison of SBMS. There's one right there at the edge. And so I want to situate this on the continent of Africa. And so oftentimes you say, hey, where are you from? And it doesn't matter where you're from. Somebody will say, if they're from Zimbabwe, people will say, oh, they're from Africa. And unfortunately, that is one of the monikers that just sticks, right? Doesn't matter, 54 countries, it is seen as one place. And so this quote is one that drove me through my research area. The continent has long been the common designation for Africa. But the darkest thing about it is that outsiders' ignorance of its people. And so that was kind of the driving motif in why I was doing this research, why I was trying to understand a little bit more about the people. So for me, looking at this cross-cultural context, I ended up in Liberia. Why Liberia? Because Liberia and African-American culture is intimately woven, right? Let me go back. Do you see Liberia's flag in the top corner? What does it look like? The American flag, minus 49 other stars, right? And so the reason is that Liberia was set up following the Sierra Leone experiment that the British did, in which they would take freed and former slaves, set them up in a country that was already there, and then say, hey, you now govern. And so Liberia sent this group called the American Colonization Society, or the US sent the American Colonization Society to Liberia. They set up, in essence, what would become an oligarchy until 1984, right? It is, but in some of the journals that some of the missionaries used, here's what it says. Liberia is a photograph of the United States. The lights are negative. The forms and outlines are the same, though in miniature. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wait a minute, this is an opportunity. They're talking about Liberia as a photograph of what the US is. And so that started me going. So as with any good researcher, we have to go and do some research. And if I wanted to understand American Colonization Society, where do you go? The Library of Congress. And what was interesting is that the Library of Congress had these photographs that they would put up, or that were in this space, right? And it says, native boys from the jungles of Africa as they come into Liberian settlements with sword and spear in their hand. But when you look at the imprint, it was taken at Arch Street in Philadelphia, right? But here's what's interesting. If you saw only that photograph and it was being sent out, what are you going to do? Support. That language is actually language that's in the Bible. So it's coded. But there's something else that happened. Then I saw this photograph. And it says, native African boys as they come to Christian schoolhouse in Liberia with plowshare and pruning hook. Interesting. Guess what? They're the same boys. But if you saw them separately, you would have no idea. So that started me on this quest to understand. Now, Liberia is unique because some of the earliest photography or daguerreotypes that were produced were actually done by African Americans in Liberia. So Augustus Washington, this is a whole long thing, but trying to lay a foundation in why this is important. Augustus Washington did daguerreotypes of the first president of Liberia, Joseph Jenkins Roberts. And so if you search, you'll see his work. Let me move forward. So here is Liberia. And so the push was to move and fix the American problem with slavery and give freed and former slaves the opportunity to go to Liberia, because Liberia technically was never colonized. There's only 2 countries on the continent of Africa that highlight that they've never been colonized. And so what happens is that they say colonization held out the promise, and you all can read this, but it's like, let's let them go back so that they can then help the communities that they thus are not deemed acceptable here. So what does that mean? Photographs produced by Westerners during the 19th and early 20th centuries provided a particular view of Africa and the local communities in which they were serving. And so the problem that I identified is this, that the photographs were produced and there were limited visual research methods to draw out the local voice. And so what does that situate us with? Photographs, as we've already established, they're windows, right? They provide a lens in which we can understand the communities that we're not oftentimes in, right? And so this is Sir H. Harry Johnston. He notes this. And so for most Western history, our visual world, J. Ruby, anthropologist, and it was a funny thing. I had a great interaction with him when I'm not sure if he's still with us, but I called him and I said, I'm from Asbury Theological Seminary and I'm working on this work. And he said, a seminary? Oh, there's no room for it, and hung up the phone. And so you could see that there was this perspective that anthropology and anthropologists, and many times, right, the perceptions that were there of Christian education or the perspectives that were there of institutions. But I still think he was on to something when he said that the world is examined through one vantage point, right? Art, high culture, and photography was in that vein. So photographers get it right, correct? Yes, they do, because we've seen the covers, right? We've seen the covers in which they are making these representations. And I wrote a journal article on this in 2018-ish, this happened. Right? They said, we admit we've made an error, and so much so that I am going to publish a whole series that addresses the apology. And they did this over the course of a year. And so they started looking at ways to deconstruct the narratives that they had already put forward. So why is that? How does that address SBMS? SBMS, in the context in which I'm going to talk to you about briefly, is that it seeks to empower Liberians and also local communities to express and reflect on their own communities through the photographs that they produce. In doing so, we obviously gain new knowledge, right? The goal is to learn the local context from the local people. And so when we start talking about, and I'll get into this in 1 second, when we start talking about why this method differentiates itself, I think it'll be clear in just a few minutes. And then the work has evolved to go into educational context, into visual ethnographies, into intercultural studies within communities. And so one of the things that is so cool, and I struggled with this in the original inception, because we're taught as researchers to have this very poignant question. And I remember my mentor saying, hey, what do you think about if somebody came into your community, what type of photographs are most important for them to know? And I was like, that doesn't fit, right? That's not complex enough. But boy, it worked, right? And so these were the questions that guided us. And the literature really it informed the questions, or do the questions help inform the literature? I want to just present that just briefly. So John Collier, we know, seminal work in visual anthropology, right? It is, and Carl Heider, right? Those two, when you think about the way in which we understand how visuals give meaning, right? This work is done. Saulworth, John Adair, their studies, right? So Collier looked at Native Americans, right? To help reorient society. When I shared earlier with you about the question, when you're looking at a new research methodology, particularly in visual anthropology, where there's not much, right? It's taking a little from here and then using it. And I was trying to figure out what was going on. How do you take this method and it gains street credit, right? And so one of my committee members or reviewers said, tell me in one page. Tell me in one page what it is that makes this distinct and why should it matter? Because photo voice is what has gained recognition. Everyone uses photo voice. Carolyn Wang helped develop the method at the University of Michigan. It is incredible. The highlight is that it's problem-based, right? It gains an insider perspective, obtains a visual record of the verbalized problem. Help me to understand what water problems are in your community. You're going to get those photographs. The problem is that the control is maintained by the administrator. When those photos are done, you turn them over to the community, to the administrator. The administrator looks at them, gives some feedback. They do the analysis. It has come out with what has been produced.
So by administrator, you mean the formal academic research?
The former academic researcher, correct. Yep. Shooting back, this came about, this is a photojournalism method. I don't like the method title, right, of shooting back, right? And it will not work in contexts where conflict has been about. But what was cool is that it's population-based, homeless in Washington, D.C., et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what comes out is that you do gain an insider perspective. And it does serve as a continual educational tool for participants, right? The problem is that how do you define the population? If you say we're looking at homeless in Washington, D.C., is that people that are in transition? Is that people that are living on the streets? Is that, and so it's somewhat ambiguous in how that method is applied. And then autophotography. Robert Ziller looks at this idea of giving people cameras and asking them to use the camera in the photographs that they produce as a way of drawing out additional information about feelings and their positions at and their understandings or lenses that they look at in life. But it's largely inward focused largely in mental health. And that requires the individual reflection. The problem is that if a person is going through or they're in crisis, how are they going to be able to articulate to some depth the space that they're in or what the photographs mean? All three of those methods have a limited photo count. Take 20 pictures, take 30 pictures, take 10 pictures, right? They set a parameter, which gets us to SBMS. SBMS has been used in anthropology, intercultural studies, and even mission organizations have used SBMS. I'll tell you where it comes from in a minute, but it's ethnographic group reflection, both individual and group, right? So it is people out producing photos, right? It does not define its group. I saw your face. Go. You ready?
Not really. I mean,
so you're looking at who's a Liberian, right?
yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to like think of the difference between photo voice.
I'm gonna get you.
I teach visual sociology, so it's.
I'm gonna get you there, I promise you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, not defining the group with preconceived, right? So who is a Liberian, right? That is broad, very broad. We're not concerned with that, right? We're concerned, are you Liberian? Yes, right? Because you've self-identified. But then we will learn more about your culture to help define how you define who you are as a Liberian. I'm going to show you. So the weakness is acquiring reflective responses from participants. And I'm going to show you a video. The person in trying to process through, you must allow time for the interviews to work. You cannot say to a participant, you're going to come, we're going to spend 10 minutes together. That's not how it works, right? Here's one of the major suggestions. SBMS does not require a photo count. As a matter of fact, the way that photography literature says is the more you allow people to take photographs and make pictures, the greater you're going to get at what's going on inside of them. It moves them from that place of just doing the photographs to get it done, to actually producing data that both in the selection process is available, but also in what is not selected is data as well. So it does not limit the participant in the power to be able to photograph and explore anything that they want with regard to the questions that are presented. Okay, so that's a major, major, major difference. And as you'll see shortly, the administrator does not control the thematic analysis. And that's a different, go ahead.
So if you were like, say, the participants, when you say that they don't have any limit on the number of images that they would be taking, like, how would you do that? Like, would you be providing them with, like, I don't, some type of camera, or would you have them
Yes.
with their phone? And how
And
would
I'm
you go
gonna-
about, like, unlimited? Like, I plan on giving out disposable cameras, but there's a limit just based on the fact that
There are.
each camera has 28.
There are, and so that's where I'm going to help to understand, or as soon as I get to this section, I'm gonna explain it crystal clear, okay? Because one of the things that we find is that when we're doing these studies, we don't provide, we have a framework, right? And we say, okay, I'm gonna give them box cameras, right? We literally took digital cameras with the largest SD card that we could present and put them in the cameras and gave them to them. And there's a reason for doing that.
Were you concerned about getting them back?
You always are. I'm concerned here, but yes. And that's part of the confirmation. If you say you trust and you want to learn, you have to make the investment to do that. And I'll talk about that in 1 second. So where does SBMS come from? It comes actually from a biblical passage. And the biblical passage is this interaction that Jesus has with a blind man. And he says, what do you see? I see people. Well, he wants to be healed, right? And he takes him outside the village. He spits on his eyes, puts his eyes on his hand. Still disgusting. And it says, what do you see? And he says, I see people that look like trees, right? So that first touch actually restored this person's sight, even if it was fuzzy. And the second touch, all it says is that his sight was restored. He saw everything clearly. The premise behind Sight Beyond My Sight is that when we interact with a community and they take photographs, we see the pictures, but we don't really know the meaning of the pictures because we have not engaged with that person, with that community to learn what is the meaning of that photograph. And so that's what level sets this from photo voice, right? You're sitting and meeting with people and saying, now tell me what this means. And you'll see that in 1 second.
Don't we do that? I mean, like, I'm taught in the books I've read on photo voice, and that's when I go out and do an interview. That's what we do with photo voice, is meet with them and discuss the pictures.
Correct, you do, but ultimately you will do the analysis, correct?
Yeah.
Not in Sight Beyond My Sight.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you that.
That makes sense.
Yes. So SBMS builds on participatory research methods, right? Visual research, and it's a new level by incorporating local participants, local research, advancing the field to embrace a method for the 21st century. Okay, here we go. So theoretically, it's grounded with Stuart Hall, right? And Clifford Geertz. So it's taking that cultural interpretive view of representation, right? How do people represent their own context? And then Clifford Geertz, Uncle Clifford is what we called him in school, right? This interpretive view of culture, right? So if culture is contested, contingent, right? Complex, right? How do we demystify that? And so I can tell, I got you now. That's good. That's good. So here's a quick glance, real quick. So we have to identify a problem. you select a research location. So for me, it was Liberia. Identify community partners and identify cultural informants. So remember I said, who's a Liberian? The community partners that you are working with will do that work with you. So guess what? I'm not saying, oh, I want John Smith to do this study, because the community partner, if you've built trust and a relationship, they will keep the mission of what the research is at the forefront. Work with the partner to recruit participants. Okay? Outline the study. This is what we're doing. This is how long it's going to take. We're going to have X number of meetings. Develop a training manual. Oh, can't tell you how many photo voice manuals I've seen, and they're almost all the same. Right? And so each manual is built on the context in which you're operating. Right? And so with all obviously required consent documents. And if you want, I can put this in an email. We can send it so that you'll have it. So then train participants in photography. So you asked the question, what's different? I never train participants in another context about photography. Here's why. I'm glad I got the first time that we took in these Canon digital cameras. I paid $3,000, took these cameras, and I had a sponsor, took the cameras into the communities. And I was like, hey, look at my point and shoot, right? And he looked at me. Amos he looked at me and said, what? I said, my point and shoot camera. And he was like, oh no. He said, it's called fixed focus. I was like, huh? Right? So now guess what I'm learning? The cultural vernacular. So Amos did the training with all the participants and was teaching them how the camera functions. And many of the participants had never used these digital cameras. Many of the participants had never had the training of a digital camera, right? And so this was 11. So some people, they weren't using their phones, the technology wasn't there. But what I did is I looked at all the research, and they gave them box cameras, and they gave them all these things that helped. They were Western ways to control. That's not what I wanted. And there is a part of the study that when I wrote it, it actually helped me gain some credibility. And there was one camera that didn't get returned.
Only one?
Hold on a minute. But I then said to that person who had borrowed the camera, who said his son had taken the camera, you made an agreement with the partnering organization. We need the camera back. And guess what? The camera came back.
Wow.
Right? And so these are things that are super important. So allow the participants to take photographs over a set period of time. So for me, initially we did 1 week. And I found out that 1 week was too short in that context, right? But I didn't want it to get so far away where all of a sudden that camera is sitting around on it and it disappears, right? Or that equipment, or you lose interest with a participant, right? And so I think our window was 10 to 14 days, right? And sure enough, we set up a time. They would drop the stuff off. So they received a camera, a notepad, an ink pen, and I had a code sheet. So I wanted them to mark down every series of photographs that they took, just make notes, use the jotting principle, right? So that when they then looked at their photographs, they had this here. And then I gave them a folder. And so everything that they carried, a camera bag. So everything that they carried would stay in one space, right? Okay. I'm liking that you're smiling. So explain to the participants the process in which they will return the camera, the equipment, right? Here's the thing. People don't want to embarrass the community partner in which they are working alongside. And so this is where it's so significant that they have the engagement with the community partners. Okay, and I'll get this to you. Schedule one-on-one interviews. So I tell them the process. You're gonna go, you got a training, we do the consent documents, you get your cameras. Oh, they're not allowed to talk to one another. So participants are not allowed to communicate with one another about anything, right? And it actually works, right? Because they don't know why they're not supposed to talk to one another about it.
How many one talk for it?
Well,
Yeah.
good question. So it's just you simply say, here's part of the guidelines for X, Y, and Z. If they do, there's not really a way for you to know that, right? But you can tell when you look at the photographs, right? And so I'll share with that in 1 second. So one-on-one interviews, so the step process, training, distribute, collect, set up one-on-one interviews, right? And then bring them back together as a focus group, okay? Print, code, photograph each participant's context, meet with each participant to walk through the piling process. So we use Spradley's piling. And then have your participant provide the top 20 and then top 3 photographs. Okay.
What does code mean?
Coding.
Code the photographs?
Yeah, so each photograph, so I get all their photographs and I print them all out.
Right.
And then on the back, 001, 002, 003, 00, so that when they are reflecting on the photographs, they're not telling me what it is. It'll make sense. Set up focus group, discussion with participants, verify themes and data. Okay. So I want to drive a little fast for the sake of time. Seeing, believing, Terrence Wright talks about this. So here is one of the training sessions. You see the training manual there. They're learning how the camera works.
Oh, that guy's smart.
Right,
It's a great picture.
right.
Yeah.
And that was one of my cultural informants, right? He had the respect in the community that was, when he said yes, that's what happened, right? And so here we go. So SBMS allows researchers in the community a participatory blah, 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 blah. I don't want to weigh you down with the language, but here's an example of one person who took 750 photographs.
Wow. Wow.
And so what you do is you give them the space to lay out all of their pictures. And what you're trying to do is verify that they just, or was there meaning to this? And by them laying out their photographs, here's the kicker. This person said, hey, oh, so the participants, so we had 11 participants in the original study. We had 12, one dropped out, right? Between 18 and 65 years old. The 65-year-old gentleman was the one whose son took the camera, eventually brought it back. Men and women, over 106, oh, I'm sorry. So this person did, I think it was 200 and something pictures, right? Over 750 photos taken, 43 different categories.
Wow.
So Photo Voice is saying, oh, these are the categories I see. They're not giving the space to allow the people to define their own categories, right? And so I'll show you how that happened. And then what we did is we realized that there were 4 major tropes or themes, right, that came out of in which. So here, I want you to see someone real quick. This is Prince Moba. Prince, the first time that he came and he started with his piling, he got sick. Yes.
What is piling?
So so piling is when you take all of these photographs. Oh, I missed something. Good question. So what I do is I tell them, give me your top 20 photographs, and I'll show that to you in the model. And they're like, top 20 photographs. And I'm like, yeah, here's the question. Tell me what photographs most represent your culture and identity that is important for outsiders. So what you're doing is you're watching them and you're actually verifying their investment in the research. This gentleman got upset because he said, I took all of these photographs. And I said, no, trust the process. And so what happened was, in him giving you his top 20, right? Now you have a data set that you can work with, right? But you also have the outtakes to say, well, why did you discard this? So it's everything. Remember, you weren't deleting anything. It was out of focus. I had the wrong angle. This didn't. So all of those are touch points for you to verify that this research is valid.
Are the categories
Yes,
based on those 20?
Yes.
Or
they're based on the 20. Yep. Good question. Great question. Yes.
So how many, so I'm taking it from the amount of times that you would be interviewed, that you'd be passing out the cameras in meeting with them.
Yep.
But then, they're gonna trim the camera in, then you're gonna develop,
Yep.
then you're gonna meet with them again and they're gonna pick the 20 and
Yep.
then.
And then you
is that
come,
the
and
end
then
of it?
everybody comes together. I think there were 6 total touch points, right? So from me meeting with the community partner, people being recruited, to the training session, to the collecting of the camera, to the one-on-one, and then the focus groups. And for the focus group, it's actually a party.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just
So-
saying, someone would be working with a very difficult
Yeah,
population.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And so in this context, and I'll offer a couple best practices that I learned.
I would love that.
Yeah, and one is that you may not want to. Well, let me run, and then I'll open this up. So here is Prince. First time I met with Prince, he laid out all of his pictures, and it was too overwhelming for him to be able to process this way. And I actually wrote about this in my dissertation, that he said that over there, you all think this way, we don't think that way. Okay. Here, when we were doing the piling, which means that you take your top 20, and then the way our minds think, if you have your 20 photographs and I ask you to put those in categories of meaning, you will do it. And so what they were doing is putting their photographs in these groups. And in doing that, do you have that article?
I have it on my computer.
Okay, we'll send out an article that
Mhm.
actually explains that piling, because you'll see a photograph in here in a minute where one person in one pile of their 20 pictures, I think he had 13 pictures. And I was like, this ain't right. And I did think, this ain't right. But what I found out is it was. He was revealing the levels of business in his community.
Whoa.
So he gave me 7 different levels of business from a hierarchy, which the top was, it was being a haberdasher or a person who makes clothes. And the lowest, according to this person, was the scratch card salesperson on the streets. I was shocked. Because everything in my human head was saying, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right, that's not right. But when he explained it, I was like, wow, okay. So here's Prince. I'll just show you just a quick second of this.
Yeah, it might be over there.
There's some audio on that. You have your computers set for that outside speaker.
Oh,
It should be part of the
Yeah.
dongle.
No, but there- yes.
oh, yeah, you're right, you're right, thank you. Thank you all for listening. I really appreciate your,
This is great. I have
Care.
questions too. Many questions.
okay.
Absolutely.
Epson, okay. There we go. Okay, here's what I need you to do. I need you to take the 3 best photos that you think okay, so real quick. So 1 pile, 2 piles, 3 piles, 4, 5, 6, he had already spread them, so he had piled already. And so now. Let's see where he takes us.
Present you and your culture. The top three out of all of these. I mean, it's the top three, the top three. The top three that you think speak the most about your community. And that are important to you and your community.
So watch his expression. Those are all data points that tell you.
Yes.
One. About you and your community.
Watch his hands. He's getting ready to do something.
Look at them. Just hold them. I want you to look over them. Remember the theme was, if somebody came into you, to your culture, what photographs would you show them that best represent you and your community? There's no right or wrong answer, but I want you to think.
Did you see you pick the other one up?
And see, if someone was looking at these photographs, would these photographs say, this is Liberia? There's no right or wrong answer, but I do want you to really look. And I'm gonna leave you for a minute and let you do that, okay?
So just a couple things. I keep double methods of recording. So I have a recorder on the table and I get permission to record the session. So every session I do is recorded so that I can verify.
Mhm.
You want me to answer that? It's up to you. I know, I'm leaving. Okay, oh. Well, on the street. Okay, questions to ask, okay?
Okay.
Is that what they can, use what they can do? Okay. Okay, so, okay, there's two ways I can do. Okay. So, here we go, you ready? Has this process surprised you? Mm-hmm. Huh? Yeah. Why? That was finished.
So this is an endurance thing.
You're just about finished. We got this and then we got a couple questions to ask, okay? All right. Which one would be your number one of this group? 114.
So you see, he doesn't tell me what the photograph is. He gives me the number.
114 is my number one. Show you what's that one. I will exercise our phone. To select the leader.
So the photograph was of him voting, of the election. And he said that it shows the outside world. So notice he's giving a distinction now between inside, outside. So we know in the anthropology literature, right? In group, out group, same was true here, right? And so when he's telling us this and he's presenting this photograph about the election, it's like, whoa, right? Okay, let me see.
107. 107. And nobody wrote campaign.
Okay, here we go.
And they are prepared to move on. They have decided to move on. So the election was very fun.
So the election was fine.
Very smooth. It was very much interesting. Even to the campaigning was interesting. You will find anybody on the street running campaign and nobody wrote campaign out of the way. People did it with respect. It's 106. 106. We get tired. We're almost done. We got another about 20 minutes. And as long as, so we'll finish this one and then I got some questions and we're done. Right?
So that's the process.
Oh, no worries.
About an hour and 15 minutes. Yep. So here are a couple photographs. Here are the categories that they gave me. So when I asked them, hey, what's the group? Remember we talked about POWs?
Mhm.
What are the POWs? This is what they labeled them. So school, farming, church group, self-help business, sick patient demonic possession, right? Students, community dwellers, living conditions in Boosie Quarter, right? Eating, school. So you can see school is there, the way of life, right? So these are all the themes that they gave me from their specific piles of photographs. Okay?
So, excuse me, each one of those in each box is an individual response?
An individual response with
To their
a collection of photographs.
Mhm.
Right,
Yes, correct. Make sense?
yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna pass Worth and the Deer here and go here. So here's what happens. When you then look at those POW groups, here's the analysis that we came out with. Who we are, what we believe, what we eat, and how we live. Okay? Oh, that's very simple. Guess what? Each one of these with a different asterisk. If I was categorizing those, I would have put them in a different place. Because when you look at fishermen in the market and rice farm, self-help businesswoman, right? She was the lady selling the fish. I might have looked at it as being what we eat. But when you give them the space to define their own categories, and the analysis comes within that focus group.
So
Yes,
just to understand how you got from the piles to this, they also helped with the clusters.
correct.
So that you had this list of the things and then you said, now help me get it down to 4.
Yep. I
Or-
asked them what are, so in the focus groups,
Yeah.
right? I had their top 3 photos. So I think we ended up with,
Like you had the 11 participants that you had their
Correct.
3 photos.
yes, and I laid them out on a table and I asked what most represented. And that's how we came up with, and so here's the piling process. Okay, so I'm gonna show you briefly how we live. So this was a photograph that was taken of a monkey on the back of, so what is so interesting is that the guy who just lost in the presidency, George Weah, right? He lost against Ellen Johnson for Sirleaf. This photograph was taken by the guy where you saw all the pictures spread on the table. He took this, and you know what his issue was? That we highlight and dress monkeys up in human clothes when we should be taking what we do much more seriously about our culture. And so I was like, whoa. So trigger warning here on what we eat. What is that? It's a dog. There is no way possible that I'm going to get access as a researcher to show this photograph. He made the argument that dog is no different than chicken. He said they're both meat. He said you cannot eat dog, and it's not called dog, actually. You know what it's called? Issue. So guess what else I learned? Cultural language. And he made the argument that chickens will run around your house, and then he said when they're small, you don't eat. But when they get full, which he was saying is an adult, you kill it. It's no problem. He said, why can't the same be true for dog? He does not eat dog. But he took me into a space that allowed them to show me that. What we believe, right? In Liberia, there are a lot of what are called African traditional religions, right? This person was actually at one space and had built his pallet there and was waiting to be healed. I don't get access to that. What we believe, right? This person, what's going on here?
The healing kind of.
No. This is going to throw you off because
Wedding?
it's not a wedding. It's
It's a teenager though?
Nope. So it's close to, so what happens is that they bring the woman, they bring all these women in and cover them up. And the groom has to be able to tell which one is his wife. And it's a way for them to make money. It's a fundraising, but this is family. And so I got access to this ritual that they have that shows what they believe, but there's a tool of how do you verify who is your soon-to-be wife. That was amazing, right? So real quick, as I wrap it up. So here is unverbalized interpretation of culture and identity. So when you present the questions, there is this unverbalized piece. We, as Walter Lippmann says, we all have pictures in our head, right? Of what is. Photographic representations. Then when you're sitting on those one-on-ones, then there's a verbalized interpretation. And then reflections. But then what happens is that once this communication goes through discussions, remember they weren't talking originally. So now they get to see the photographs of one another. What happens is that they will then come back, many of them, and talk about this internal change of how they understood their own culture.
Did they fight about the representation?
There was some good discussion.
I bet.
Yep. Yep.
Does that debate get it into your finding?
It does.
Mhm. Nice.
There we go. See, I'm looking.
So SBM does gather new knowledge. Host culture expresses a sense of empowerment, but there are what I have deemed cultural protectors.
Mm-hmm.
People that don't have anything to do with the direct study, but they come out and they say, why are you photographing this police station? You know you're not supposed to do that. And you're like, well, are you the police? No, but you know the rules of this. Why are you photographing this? And so that was a significant piece. The use of photography must be contextual. You can't use this in every place for some of the reasons I just shared, right? So you have to be very, very selective about where you're using photography and how you're using it. And then cultural knowledge is best gained when it comes from within the culture. And so this is the piling process or the sorting. It is very, very long, so I'll pass. But this is an example, and I know time is short. Well, it's not loading. And this is how we used it for the Ross Community Center. This semester, our students have embarked on what I call a journey. They're working on a partnership with the Ross Community Center to provide visual ethnographies. And those ethnographies are really stories that get at a deeper meaning of who they are, what their community is, and where they find value.
Rule that we have with the project
Hey.
is like they can't delete anything because
Yeah.
we want to see like at firsthand what they're documenting so that they
There you
can
go.
have not authentic.
So I'll pause there. Can I give you a 30-second thing?
Mhm.
And this is an example of the pals, right? So watch this. So anything else in your group that you want to share?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so here's the hard part. You ready? I need you to look over these pictures and tell me what. So she has 3 pictures. 4 piles. Are your top 3 pictures? What 3 pictures are your top 3 pictures?
Will you put your other 20 kilos and put your other 10 in those? And tell me if I spelled your name correct. Number?
001.
And give me the title. What would you call that one picture if you had a title?
Does this help
Is
you?
that the coding, is
Yeah,
the title of the
this is the
coding?
title, so those, for that individual. Okay, watch this, this is, and I'm sorry, we went over.
No, you're fine. We can, yep.
Okay. Watch this, this is so powerful.
I don't have a right answer.
All right, we'll come back to that then. So tell me what that picture is of. What does it mean to you?
Coming together as a community.
Okay. So the photo is black hand, white hand. It's on the coffee shop down yes. Hoyt, yes, Hoyt and Memorial,
Mhm.
yes. And it's this black hand, white hand holding with a cup of coffee, right? Okay, watch this. And I do appreciate your time. Thank you all.
Is that your title?
I guess,
Okay.
better as a community.
Is that your title?
I guess.
Okay. Why is coming together as a community important to you in your top three?
Okay. So as a qualitative researcher, we're always trying to verify what is someone saying, does it really matter, right? And how do we know? How do we verify? And this is what happens.
Because I definitely do not believe in racial separation.
Is racial separation exist in the community?
So now we're doing the qualitative.
It does. Still to this day, it does.
What impact do you think that racial separation had in the community?
Like on background, I love it. So, but the racial separation, I see affects a lot of the kids because. So I've raised a lot of kids. I've as a foster parent for years, I adopted some children. My daughters, I have 2 daughters that are married to Black men, and I have biracial grandkids. And so I see a lot of stuff that happens in our community and our school here. You know, biracial kids are picked on sometimes. They are, they are harassed sometimes because they have a black dad and a white mom. And you have white children sometimes that their parents are racist, and so that goes over into their children. And now I'm gonna tell you something funny. There is a Black man here in our neighborhood who hates white people. He is very racist. Very, very racist against white people. It's not like white people.
Really?
Yes. And he does come down to the church and he gets food, but he has no problem that, like he knows I have white daughters married to Black men, and he thinks that is horrible. Black men should marry Black women, white women should marry white women, Asians should stay with their own race, the whole 9 yards. That's just him. That's how he feels. That's how he rolls. And he is very, very, and he will tell you that, it is not his bag of beans. And so you get, and I don't like to conversate about that. I'm always telling him, my daughter's made her choice. I had my grandbaby down there one day. And she had came here from Chicago. They were from Chicago. And she had came out, she's not a baby. I should read, she's 17. She's my grandbaby. And she, is very beautiful. She has white features, but you can tell she's black. You know, she has a large nose and her hair is soft, kind of like yours, soft, but long, you know, but you can tell she's mixed, you know, and, yeah, and he just, you know, he had some words to say, and I was like, I don't appreciate that, you know, she can't help that her mom and dad are, you know, that she's mixed, and he's like, well, that's the problem with society, nobody addresses it, you know, and she was like, Mom, did he really not like me? And I'm like, I don't think that, it's not that he don't like you, he is prejudiced in all ways. I said, it doesn't matter, and she said, well, you know, it's bad enough to get that in Chicago, but I have to get that here. And I'm like, well, it's everywhere, honey. It is just part of your life, you know? It's something you're gonna have to live with. And so she lives with that every day, and he doesn't care what he says to her. I have issues with that. So.
You mean your second? Number two. That was heavy, that was heavy, Janelle.
But it's true.
No,
It's the truth.
Yeah.
And that is why this picture means so much to me, because we need to come together as a community and as a nation and as a world, because it's tough enough the way it is. It's just tough enough the way it is. So if we don't come together, then we're gonna be separated, and that's not the way life needs to be. So, yes, my opinion.
And I appreciate your opinion, thank you.
Did we verify why she took the picture and how it gave her meaning?
Mhm.
Questions? Thank you all, and I'll send you the hit list,
That would be great.
and
Thank
then if
you.
you want to share that,
We
please.
can make it available, and I have
Yeah.
2 articles and, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please. I have a question.
Yes.
So, the questions that you are using for follow-up,
Uh-huh.
right, are those similar questions that you ask the different participants?
So, no, they're based on the context in which, so you know how we use photographs to interview, right? So photo elicitation is the method, right? So you're using the photographs and then you're building on the answers that they give you to gain insight into what they're doing.
But so when the person gave you the title and you say, explain to me why this is important for you, is that something you ask everybody?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because that's the overarching question. If someone was coming to your community, what photos would be most important for you? And
Right, so
yes.
you have a set of questions.
Absolutely.
That are those main ones, let's say, and then people elaborate and you may go into other questions, but you have. I don't do qualitative research.
Yeah, so that's
I'm
it.
more a quantity kind of, you know, but,
Yes. And I passed this.
okay.
Right, but based on the study, you will formalize your set of required questions for each of them. Does that make sense?
Yes. that
Okay.
makes sense.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I just glossed past that to get to,
Got it.
because I needed to acknowledge Ross and the work with the Middletown Studies.
Mhm,
Okay,
mhm.
okay.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
So it makes sense coming out of intercultural studies, like the goal is to provide information about a community to other communities.
Yes.
I mean, that's part of identifying the problem,
Correct.
right? So that was the first idea of identify the problem. It can be, it sounds to me like it works best when it's a really broad thing.
Yeah.
And then the goal is to provide that that information. I'm trying to formulate my question. So I guess, I mean, they would probably take different pictures if they said, you know, how would you represent Liberia to Liberians than they would, how would you represent Liberia?
Absolutely.
Which is fine. Those
Yeah.
are just different studies.
So may I, while
Yeah,
you're thinking of
yeah.
that, so in the case of the Ross Community Center, their question was dealing with revitalization.
Okay.
So
yeah.
how do you understand, because what happened was the community partner said this area is being revitalized. And so the question was, how is revitalization,
Mhm.
you know, what are some of the issues that, you know, are shaping revitalization or something to that extent
Mhm.
in your community? And so that's how
Mhm.
the information on the Ross Community Center came about.
Because I could see how, SBMS would be better than that specific, like you're saying with photo voice, a very specific thing about like, what is your water quality?
Right.
And one of the things I asked in my dissertation that elicited some really interesting responses was, what do you think is a good life?
Yeah.
And so I think something broad like that, where there's not a lot of parameters, or you say, take a
Right.
picture of a good life, and then you get
Right.
at some of those deeper things there. But my other question was about piling, and I don't know that much about piling. So like, if they only took 15 photos, then they couldn't take out 20, right? Or
Correct.
like, so then
Absolutely.
you had to go by how many photos they
You
had.
go by the minimum in which they produce. And so in this photograph, in this picture here, I actually called my mentor from Liberia and said, this guy only took like 7 pictures. What the hell do I do?
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
and he was like, dude, that's great. And I'm like, no, he didn't complete. He said, yes, he did. So your questions are based on, tell me your engagement. What was it that, why did you take a number of photographs?
Yeah.
Was there? And so that, and this picture is a picture of a newspaper,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so this was one person that was an outlier,
Yeah.
right? But I then had a young lady who was the 18-year-old
Mm-hmm.
who was not like the capacity to be able to engage in that conversation. She was like, I'm just here so that because it was fun and I learned how to use a camera.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, you take what they give you.
Right.
And you qualify that.
And then I was gonna ask just like how you decided to choose how many piles, like, I mean, I think,
don't.
right, so
They
they choose how
They
many piles.
choose. And so what I actually learned was that so the question, how do you develop piles? When I've told the students, I said, so you went to school? And they said, yes. I said, what was your day like at school? And they would say, well, I go to math, I go to English, I said, what I want you to do with your photographs is organize your photographs in similar ideas or themes, right? What do you mean a theme? Well, when you went to math class, what did you work on? Math.
Mhm.
Okay. And I used that example because it was safe and I wasn't shaping how they think
Right.
about their topics, right?
Mhm.
And so, does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yes.
I just wanted to, do you have like articles on,
Yes, we're gonna share.
Okay, cause
Yes.
I'd like to teach, or, go over some of that with my
Yeah.
students next semester.
And I'll gladly come if you like.
I would love for you to come.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
right,
so-
that'd be great.
So all their photographs, I actually code them and put them on spreadsheets, right? And then I cut them up so that, like if you notice on the slug there's 0041. So on the back, I'll write 0041, right? So that I am not interpreting the images that they have created. And in this case, these are all the photographs that she produced, a total of 134 pictures.
Mm.
Right? And so, yeah.
If you go to the Center for Middletown